would like to invite to join me here Mr. Dominic Oldman, which we have the pleasure to host today. He is the Director of Kartography Community Interest Group, and he is former head and principal investigator of the ResearchSpace project. The title of his lecture today is ResearchSpace, a semantic and processual knowledge-based platform, theory and practice. Thank you, Dominic.
So I'm Dominic Oldman. I'm Kartography, as Manchester said. We're a social enterprise company, so we're a non-profit. We formed after the British Museum project was finished because we decided we needed to make sure that ResearchSpace was made available to the community. And we built up a reasonably big community of people using ResearchSpace. So ResearchSpace is quite a simple idea in a way, in that we have a graph, it's dynamic instead of static, so that's the difference between using ResearchSpace and a database system. The idea is that subject experts who currently are prevented from modeling database systems are able to use their knowledge to expand, model in any direction they want, and with an ontology that allows them to synthesize it with other researchers or organizations. It's as simple as that. So the tools that we produce are about trying to get rid of predeterministic models. So the idea that you get to a point, you have some information that you've got, you've done some research, you go to your screen, there's no field to put it in. The ResearchSpace system allows you to expand the categories of knowledge. That's what the system is about. Dynamism, it's about, as Francis was saying, complexity. First revealing connections. So the first reveal is that ResearchSpace is much more based on a tradition, a Chinese tradition, a Taoist tradition, than it is on a Western tradition. And that follows through one way through to the present day. So what I'm about to present is something that's about complexity, and complexity requires that we sort of revolutionize the way that we think about data, the structures of data, and the Cartesian model that we have in current systems. So this is what's been happening over the 20th century. We've been moving, all disciplines, even computer science, has been moving towards a processual way of thinking. And today, in computer science, one of the dominant theories, progressive theories, is complexity theory, which was derived from something called systems theory, which was developed in the 20th century. And again, another reveal of connection is that Joseph Needham is an important person when studying Chinese history. It's an important person in the development of ResearchSpace as well. And a lot of ResearchSpace work that was done in it was simply historical research, understanding how people think and do their work in a normal environment, and then what they have to do in order to make it fit into a digital environment, and trying to reduce the gap and differences between the two things. So in the 20th century, we had a movement at the beginning. There were more philosophies, process reality philosophies, and we moved away from seeing the world as substances to processes. We started moving away from the static to dynamic, intrinsic to unfolding relations, something called external relations to internal relations. So the idea that the essential features of something include its relationships, whereas in classical philosophy, external relationships are independent of the thing. This is why we have these very sort of universalistic records, intrinsic, materialistic records, which are intended to be sort of essence of something, but which in processual theory are not. They expand out into dependencies with other systems. We're moving away from disciplinary to transdisciplinary. away, hopefully, from databases to graphs. We're moving towards knowledge bases rather than simple references and indexes. Hoping this will work.
Which is different from those all three or whatever. And the development today of several items of knowledge in which you examine about seven disconnected questions called true or false. Critics point of views, you might say. And the first point I want to make is that the world is not like that at all. Or let us be more polite. The world in which I live is not like that at all. And as you know, it's your business and everyone's what you want.
The point that Gregory Bateson is making is that we're using tools and mechanisms and systems that reflect an artificial abstraction of the world, which isn't based on reality. And this is a feature of classical philosophy as well. It's very idealistic in its approach. I'm doing a history dissertation at the moment, and this is a big challenge for historians who are looking at material past sources, original sources, and they need to make sense of those sources and need to abstract from those sources and to bring them together into patterns, into linkages, into connections, and to make interpretations of them. The big challenge for historians is that there's an increasingly large amount of data, but there's also a necessity to have work that represents change and transformation. So that's what history is about. It's about looking at how things change over time. Unfortunately, we have lots of systems in heritage and art and documentation which are static. We've built up this huge legacy of static information, which is anachronistic and at worst, spiritually, very little diversity. And now we're looking back at it and thinking, what can we do about this? One of the big things that people thought they would do is they publish it. They publish it out from their original databases onto the web, and then we say, okay, we've made it public, at least we've done something here. But the problem is that data is just replicating some of the legacy and anachronistic procedures that we've had in organizations for a long time. The other big thing that historians have been troubled by is that computing has been very quantitative in its approach. A lot of historians take different vantage points. Some of them are micro-historians, some of them like to do qualitative history. It's not that they're not interested in quantitative, but they think that there are different ways and different approaches to looking at history, which computers simply do not support. So part of ResearchSpace is about introducing a qualitative methodology alongside a quantitative methodology, and seeing them as part of the same system. Yeah, they're connected. And connecting those two things is an increasingly important part of digital work for historians, but also explains why historians have been very, very slow to pick up digital techniques and methodologies. And there's been surveys that come out and show that historians will use digital reference sites, digital sources, but are very slow to pick up on data-oriented projects and produce their own data systems, design their own data systems. It's all about the fact that history is about different vantage points and being able to synthesize those vantage points, and digital just doesn't do it. So a short history of digital history. There was a pioneer at Oxford University called Lawrence Stone, who was a major figure in this country in terms of was a pioneer of statistical analysis using computers. This was at the end of the 1960s when he had these huge computers putting data in cards, punch cards and stuff like this. And he was a great campaigner for the use of computers. But as he started using them, he was quite keen on looking at change and transformation of classes across time. So, looking at the elite classes, the mobility of people within different classes. As he started looking at records, he realized that there were problems in the way in which computers dealt with that. One of them was about categorization. Categorization is fairly subjective. So you could choose something, but other people wouldn't necessarily know what it meant or agree with that categorization. And that's why we've reached this position today where no one agrees with vocabularies. Vocabularies are extremely poor in doing synthesis and interoperability. That's why, of course, we use the CWCRMs as logical approach. But also, the database systems didn't allow the type of nuanced abstractions that historians were used to do. So there's a huge difference between abstraction onto a column and a row table and the type of abstractions that you might do on a piece of paper and being able to bridge the gap between them. So there was an issue about the nature of the sources and the ability to take those sources and represent them in a very linear, abstract, tabular format. And then there was the reliability of the results, because they had to go off to a team of people who put them into the computer, who created the models, who did the algorithms and whatever, and the historians couldn't make sense of whether they were reliable or not. And so at the end of this period, he wrote an article called Revival of Narrative, and he predicted that historians would go back to more narrative-type histories because these type of technologies were simply not working. And that's exactly what happened. He himself, by the way, was handed out to Oxford because his categorization confused everybody, and they thought it led to conclusions that they thought were not right, and he lost the credibility of that as a result of using a database. Another period of activity for historians is in the 1980s and 1990s. It's actually historians who set up an association of history of computers. And they started to realise that they needed to make computers, they needed to design computers that dealt with really important issues in history, like fuzziness and uncertainty and historical context. And they couldn't do this even with the new next generation of database systems, which are becoming much more accessible. So they tried to build their own system. They built a system called Clio, which was a system that combines the qualitative nature of the sources with quantitative information and tried to tackle this issue of historical context and fuzziness. And what they found was that one, it was an extremely difficult task to do. And two, they were up against a growing industry, a growing database industry, where you could simply buy a database for £65, bring it onto your computer, and start a database straight away. This is going to compete with that, because the resources needed to create this more complex environment, which is too great. It just fell away. What happened to them was that they were forgotten about. So the digital humanities forgot about all of this work, and by and large, the majority of projects in digital humanities happen with databases. The two areas that historians have criticised are variously fundamental issues. Independently of computers, the disciplines have been converging. So historians were pioneers in what I would say is 20th century development of systems theory and complexity. They were right there at the beginning. They were criticising their own work in that they tried to take on scientific approaches, tried to take on a scientific methodology, and realised that the scientific doctrines of the time, these Cartesian notions that there are rules and axioms of science, couldn't be applied to history. It was too too nuanced, too contextualized, too fuzzy. But at the same time, the natural sciences were finding exactly the same thing. In the natural sciences, we have this whole period, for example, of quantum computing and quantum physics, where all of the axioms of Newton are questioned and in some cases overturned. So then we start to realise that science also is a fuzzy subject, that actually there were lots of uncertainties, that there's fuzziness, that their information changes over time as they understand the world more and understand the complexity of the world. So there's this sort of convergence across lots of disciplines, which resulted in a much more formalised version of systems theory after the Second World War, when scientists and anthropologists and people like Gregory Mason were collaborating in order to move forward. Computers, though, were not at the stage where they were uptaking this new philosophy, this new approach, this new methodology. Computers after the war were generally being pushed by commercial companies. Commercial companies were growing into bigger organisations, into global organisations, and they needed a tool that could deal with the bureaucracy that their new large organisations were producing. And there was a sort of split from the design and development of computer architecture and the development of system theory, complexity theory, and they sort of diverged. And ever since then, they've sort of been diverging and coming together and diverging and coming together. And gradually, complexity theory is challenging lots of the things that historians used to challenge when they were looking at computers. So this is a book that I bought recently. It's by quite a prominent computer scientist, so not a historian, a computer scientist. And she's called Melanie Mitchell. She's a professor in America. She's an acknowledged expert in complexity theory and computers and complexity theory. And the very first line in her book says, reductionism has been a dominant approach to science since the 1600s. René Descartes, one of the reductionism's earliest proponents, described his own scientific method thus: to divide all the difficulties under examination into as many parts as possible, and as many ways we're trying to solve them in the best way. This sort of cuts through what we're trying to achieve. It cuts through the connections, it cuts through the nuances, it cuts through the sort of linkages that lead to interpretation and explanation. And it gets rid of this notion that's really important to systems theory, that the whole is more than the sum of parts. This development in systems theory, something called cybernetics and something called general systems theory, has had a profound effect on art. So art as an environment, and artists like Hacker producing artworks which are about revealing linkages and patterns, particularly, for example, in commercial systems. And this is a feature of a lot of artists and a lot of modern artists who are using their art to produce what we would call in ResearchSpace knowledge maps. They're revealing connections using their art. And this is a quite big movement, such that in the 1990s, in terms of museums, Tate started challenging this idea that museums presented their collections in an object-focused way. Started to bring in university researchers and lecturers to start looking at the way in which they presented their collections, in terms of its linkages, its historical and social linkages, and actually taking over some of the exhibitions. This was called New Art History, and it's very much based on this very processual type of thinking. But the systems that we have in museums are still the same. We still produce static, anachronistic, uncontextualized information, and this is a big problem. I'm part of a task force for Seagull, and we've been looking at a new definition of documentation. to encourage organisations to look at their documentation in a completely different way. This hasn't been published, this is, you'll look at it, you can criticise it if you want. If you want a copy of it, I can give it to you. But it's a very accessible definition. One of the issues is how do organisations even attempt to implement such a definition in the structure that they have at the moment. And this is what the ResearchSpace system is about. This, in a way, aligns the type of philosophy, the type of methodology that we're actually using in the ResearchSpace system. Because if we don't, then how are we going to fix the huge amount of data, the huge amount of accuracy data that we've already produced? We can only do it through collaboration, we can only do it through participation, we can only do it through structures which are dynamic, not static. That's the only way we can do it. And if we carry on not looking at this issue, then we will carry on publishing out linked data, whatever it is, it doesn't matter what the format is, we will carry on publishing out data in the same old format. And the connections we can make with them are very important. One of the ideas behind ResearchSpace is that there should be no division of labour between research, theory, and practice. And we started to implement this in organisations. So we implemented at the National Archives in the UK, and they had a strategy of something called researcher practitioner. This was the idea that people who are doing expert work on objects, conservation, science, curation, or education are experts in their field, yet they are constrained by a database system which is orientated towards administration. And what they do is they fragment all their knowledge in other repositories. So you can see in SharePoint repositories, spreadsheets, Word documents. It's all spread out. If you had the time, you could potentially go through it and try and bring it all together. But actually, there's too much. They need a system. They can bring all of this together and start connecting. And that's what they do in TNA. So the issues that we've got are about language, about semantics, about dynamism, about structure, database structures and graph structures. And also, we have a problem with resources, which may not be solved by having systems which align carefully with what you do on a day-to-day basis. The problem with organisations' technology is they work on a total cost of ownership model. And what they say is, how much does it cost to pay for machines and software, to maintain and support the users of these systems? They top this up and they try and reduce that cost as much as possible. What they don't take into account is that huge cost and overhead of people putting this data in all these different places. That doesn't come into the equation. But actually, I suspect the cost to subject experts is much greater than the cost to the IT department. But these two things are not altogether. So what we're looking for in ResearchSpace is something that is flexible. Doesn't mean that you have, as soon as you have a piece of information that doesn't fit in the predefined model, you have to go somewhere else. But it's accessible. So we have a new version of ResearchSpace, which is much more accessible. You can download and start using straight away. And we're looking at direct interoperability, looking at more decentralized type of projects where you and your research system simply connect to someone else's research basis. Rather than all these layers of technology that lock you in all the time. You change something up, you change something up here, and this pipeline, this workload, and all of this stuff, which costs huge amounts of money. Why can't we have subject experts expanding the model and directly connecting to each other and reducing all of that cost? So this is a contradiction. I found this on LinkedIn. You probably can't read what it says, but I summarised it. As a collection manager, I try to preserve this creative knowledge, but storing outputs and metadata of this work does not necessarily capture the knowledge. The experience of spending time with the collection, its associated documentation, and the people who have interacted with the collection is greater knowledge that cannot easily be last one. This is a familiar slide. I don't even have to read the rest of it. You all know that this happens. This is what we're doing with TNA. This stuff over here is their sort of day-to-day. They have to do assessments, they have to do treatments, they look at manuscripts, and they fix the manuscripts and stuff like this. But actually it involves huge amounts of historical research. They're not just gluing things together. They're looking at the context in which these things are written, they're looking at the social context, they're looking at significance, they're looking at priorities, looking at strategies around those things, and they're looking at also techniques and methods. So they need something aligned with this, a changing knowledge base. So as their knowledge changes, and as they connect that knowledge to what they're doing on a day-to-day basis, they can see change and transformation. They can use that information, which is much more exciting and interesting information than just the administrative, I did this today, I did that, I did that, I did this, and then I put it back in the box or whatever. We have a growing knowledge base which we can use for support and training, education, strategy and planning, all sorts of things. We can start linking to other people. We can start joining and synthesizing information. We can start building out something that's much more connected, interesting, semantic, rich. So this is why I put this slide in about what do we mean by everything is connected. This was the big ECDOM 2024 conference. But no one actually defined what it actually means, what the purpose of it is. Is it just about publishing stuff from a predetermined database onto the web and then waiting for someone to connect to it? Or how do they change it? They see something that should be included. How do they change your internal database, which is what all this information is predicated? What's the theory behind this record? This is the Zhang family tree record on the left. What's it for? What connections can you make from it? What can you do with that? This is a person who's produced a specific piece of art which is full of connections, full of interesting insight about his life, about his country, about the developments within his country, and nothing here is in the record. His artwork is the documentation. This is just a mere inventory. The prevailing view of documentation remains keeping to the traditional template that is database friendly. This is an important point, that we continually produce standards which conform to an instrumentation rather than to our new systems of knowledge. That's the physical properties of the object, basic provenance, where it came from, who made it, composition, conditions, etc. As I say, what type of connections can this be? There are two types of relations, and when we talk about connecting and revealing connections, there are two types of relation. And in the Cartesian world, the thing and its relationship are separate. And this is a tradition in Western documentation, Western approaches to things, that we have this sort of very arrogant view where we just simply go around and have a template that documents the rest of the world in a very sort of intrinsic way. But actually, in the processual world, the internal relations philosophy is that those relationships, those contextual relationships, are a part of the essential object, and those are the things that we should be reporting. And that's why that CDOC definition in task force is so radical in the way in which it approaches new documentation. So as I said, this artwork, which I took from Adriana's e-reader article, which was extremely good, and I learned a lot from it, is packed with lots of interesting connections. It's captured in research. How long have I got?
Another half an hour.
Oh, great.
Q&A included.
Okay, so the reason I'm asking that is I want to actually show this slide. So this is the new ResearchSpace system. Let's just go back to the beginning. What this system does, in fact, is it replicates the ontology in different interfaces, has different vantage points. So it actually takes all of the core entities of the CDOC-CRM and it creates a template for them. So this is a slightly more constrained way of looking at the system. But all of the forms have connections to all the other forms, so it actually replicates all the relationships within the CDOC-CRM. So technically, you can just take this out of the box and produce whatever system you want just from these templates, using these generalizations. Which means that we can start testing it on PhD students, so we'll take it to some universities and have workshops where people can start messing around with this without having any technical knowledge whatsoever. If I look at one of these things, if I look at information objectives, so we have a template, and it has the sort of usual type of inputs, but the difference with these inputs is that they connect to another input. It's part of something, it's part of the document. And then it creates the relationship between the first form and the second form, which conforms to the relationships in the CDOC-CRM. What we probably will do, put the actually explicitly put relationships in, so you can see what we're doing. So it actually becomes a training aid for anybody who wants to learn CDOC-CRM. If we go, this finder thing here is configurable by the user, and you can decide what's in it and what's not in it. So you can mess around. If we go to a quick knowledge map a couple of days ago, so there are all sorts of connections. There's an ontology that we released, which is an extension of CDOC-CRM, which is about influence, which was exclusively we're working with Tate and time-based medium. And basically it says there are different types of influence. Communicative influence, there's social influence, there's environmental influence, and stuff like this. So, saying around these influence societally by collectivism, but also individualism. Marxist Tongue is influenced also by the idea of collectivism. And then we can produce more sort of sub-areas of that proposition there. But this is very nuanced. So these things have features, and there's influence on man, label. Put that in, you can start teasing out the meaning of all of this. And we can put in all bits and pieces stuff on. So I've got this one here, which is connected. So I said rescore that on screen. So if I put this in here, we've got another artist, we start saying, okay, there's another influence here, there's a communicative influence between these artists. So we can say that, and we can join them together, so we can say, okay, this thing is connected to, this thing is connected to Zag, and the connection is that it's been influenced. I don't know if this is true, by the way, but it's possible. And he is the person who influences, so he's conservative line. Yeah, it's an conservative line, and it's manifest in this object, so it's represented by this object. And I make a connection between the artist and the influence. And that way I can start using networks of influence across different artists, different concepts, and different compositions. I can start expanding out these connections to create a knowledge base, maybe just for artists who are interested in this idea of bigotry and cultural identity and so on. Anyway, it's quite fun doing these things as well. But what it does is it actually is a different vantage point onto the same data. So if I click on Zang, it shows you that I'm actually using the same information as I would be if I was using the form. So it's a different way of approaching it. If I go back to this, I can do different approaches. So I go back to this one here, where I look at some of those entities. It's like putting it into an annotation tool, and starts annotating and I put it into one. So you go on and on. You can sit there all day if you want. And you can expand and expand and expand. And then you can connect to someone else's. And they can connect to someone else's. And they can connect to someone else's. They're done. That's participating in collaboration. Okay. There are lots of other tools in ResearchSpace, which I'll be posting in a video, so you can sort of range so I took this quote back, which I thought was very interesting. This is actually a quote. So becomes a metaphor for social orthodoxy and cultural reproduction, reproducing culture to a mere mechanical practice in which there is no possibility of criticism or renewal. I can say that about data basis. So here's my performance art, my point. It's this record. That's what it's doing, it's this record. That's what we're doing. ResearchSpace has multiple use cases because it's flexible, because it has that flexible structure. It has a structure, but it's a dynamic structure. It combines the structure and dynamism together. And it can be used by individual researchers, so I use it for my own research, other people, as I say, completely using it for them, and other PhDs who can choosing it for their projects. It can be used for larger projects, monographs, like book assignment. The important thing is if you do a monograph, and this is what the Mellon were really concerned about when they granted the money, was they wanted something like Lake Hockaside, which we did as a research project some years ago. They wanted to be able to connect it to another thing. So they weren't disjoint, they weren't separate, they weren't monographs physically, they were things that could be expanded by other people. You can do organisational systems, which is what we're doing with TNA, so potentially have the opportunity to cross organisation boundaries. Systems do cross organisation boundaries, but not just functional. That's what databases do as well. They create functional systems for a department. But there are many, many connections across an organisation. Systems should be taken account of, which are too expensive to do as a database architectural project. It's good, originally did, it cost too much, and it was too much effort. We had huge amounts of people trying to keep it going. It was still very static. And then we've got an international point, I had to mention this, the Paris project is coming up, which is trying to cross a lot of organisations across the world. Yeah. So one of the other things about the new version of ResearchSpace, it allows you to set up your resources yourself and to work out where they need to sit in the interface. And it aligns these visual authoring tools with the more traditional ones. And TNA is starting to do this, so they're starting to have got training courses where they actually learn to do these maps, learn to do C.CRM, and they become integrated with the whole design process. This is what we need. You can't be a division of labour. You can't teach your division of labour and at the same time. A division of labour needs to be the right people doing the right things and collaborating in the right ways. This is why we're trying to get services, curators, whatever, to learn this. And we help by producing new tools, for example, that inputs into RTF, their spectral data, their instruments and stuff like that. It's stuff like and we're also importing data API, so we connect up to Connect, TNA, to other, we connect that to other ResearchSpace environments. And we can, if they're not ResearchSpace environments, obviously .CRM, we can convert that data as it comes across. If we put a stop to all of this big bang stuff, where we have to have 2 years of putting time to export this data, clean it up, and whatever. We can do it bit by bit. It doesn't have to be big bang. We can be peer to peer. One of the big issues Tim Berners-Lee has now, so he was the creator of the web, and now he's saying it's fragmented, that actually you have no control over your connections. You can't connect in the way that you want. And now he's trying to decentralize it, give you control over your own data. And I think this is what this system is about as well, peer to peer. Being able to have control over what you give to other people, but also to give you the power to give stuff to other people in a form that is semantically useful and they can understand, which is where the sequence is going. This is a point about connections, so we do a lot of publishing to big data. I wonder whether we think much about whether those connections are ones that are useful or actually shouldn't be made, and actually should be changed and modified. So none of this technology is neutral. There's a theory behind it. We don't stop to think about the theories behind the technology we're using at the moment. The theories behind the technology at the moment are disjoint with the sort of things that progressive computer scientists are now starting to do in terms of complexity. We need to understand that difference. We need to understand how we design these systems in the future. Databases. This just reiterates that databases, they were designed to support pigeonholes. You put your data in each of the pigeonholes, and the system efficiently retrieves it and gives it to you. They were designed for supply chains, they were designed for companies. They were actually invented not in universities at all, they were invented in a company, a data processing company, and we just simply adopted it. And what we don't ask ourselves is, what's the effect of this technology having on our discipline? As opposed to, how should our discipline be shaping how these systems work? How do we turn that around? How do we stop being the consumers of stuff that's being designed by other people who don't understand what we do, as opposed to taking our systems of knowledge, taking our theories of knowledge, and actually putting them into a design system? That's what we did in research. Inside the organisation, we still actually have no control over models. We're locked into the predefined model, inflexible categories, inflexible structures, inflexible expansion. And that's why we built on this legacy, as I said before. Outside the organisation, we publish it out. The people who receive that data still have no participation in our data. They still have no influence on our model, even if they have more information and better knowledge about what we're doing, and that's often the case. Actually, increasingly, organisations and museums are not the authoritative for what it is. Yet we publish it out, but we do not take it in, because we have no mechanism for doing that. And then these massively expensive pipelines that we produce, where we take our system, we spend a lot of money publishing it all out into data, but it's locked in because that end publication is locked in by the source of database, even more because we have all of this middleware to stop it from changing. Because if we change something in the source, then we have to change it in another place. Workflow and publication doesn't go out. It's more and it's counterproductive. It's illogical. In a knowledge society, productivity comes from giving more power to people who have the knowledge. It doesn't come from a division of labor. And so that's what we've been doing. We've been taking our databases, not changing them. We've been keeping them. We've simply been publishing them. We've been putting all the money into a pipeline, which ensures that we cannot change our internal system. And it's not much use to people who are actually receiving it.
10 minutes.
For questions as well?
Yeah, 10, 15 is fine. I think that Lucas can wait 5 minutes.
Oh, we can wait.
Yeah.
So just a little bit about, I said this was about theory and practice, and I think I've done both. I think I've talked about both. But just going back to the origins in terms of computer science, I said my questions about AI. So we have two types of AI. We have symbolic AI, semantic AI, and we have this generative AI. And the generative AI is a data processing AI. And symbolic AI is one where we are participants in that system. So the whole tradition of Babbage was he wanted to get rid of people completely from the work process. He wanted to try and relegate them. And he wanted machines to take over and to talk about machine intelligence into a time where people were they wanted to reduce costs, of course. They overtook capital to reduce costs. It came up with this sort of
sort of idea that potentially we could get rid of humans. At the very least, we can get rid of skilled humans and just look after the machines and maintain them as they along. And there are some synergies with generative AI, and then there's a lot about getting rid of human beings, but actually the reliability of it and what we're using. Well, there are some really good things to use, don't get me wrong. There are some benefits that come out of that. But I've noticed that a lot of people are now looking at the limitations of generative AI, thinking maybe we should look back at semantic AI. I've noticed that some research institutions are actually saying maybe we should combine the two. I don't know how they're going to combine the two, but they're looking at doing this. And so there's a circle going round. So Google got rid of symbolic AI and said that there's no good business model for this. If you use generative AI and get it up and running, all you need is tons and tons of computers. We can use the algorithms we've got already. We can start building a business model and some money out of it. We can forget teaching computers meaning and interacting with them in a meaningful way. This is the business model that works for us. Now, slowly, as it becomes bigger and bigger, we're starting to see weaknesses. Knowledge representation is about creating digital surrogates. It's about how we tell the computer, align with the computer, some sort of map, reference to the real world. A surrogate, how good is a surrogate? A surrogate's not very good in the systems we're using. Ontological commitment. So what SQL CRM does is it has scientific reference for the information put into SQL. It's not telling us what to put into SQL, it's saying reference it against a real world thing so that everybody knows what you're talking about. That's all it's doing. And that's why it restricts itself to only scientific concepts which are relatively robust and stable over time. It tries to avoid things where we disagree. Because all it's trying to do is do interoperability for epistemological data. It's an ontology for epistemology. It's not trying to force you into using its classes actually for your own data, allows you to make statements. And the really important thing about it is that it's intelligent in that the structures and the logic within it allow you to create rules, allow you to influence reason, databases being applied. And what I've been saying before about efficiency, it's about efficient computation for systems which allow you to think and represent your thinking. So the idea with databases was if it restricts you and reduces you, we effectively reduce efficient computing. But that's no, as I said before, that's no longer a good model. What we need is a good model which allows dynamism, which allows you to bring your thinking into a system which is in itself efficient. Again, this is where the ontologies come in. So actually you can reduce costs by giving flexibility, which is counterintuitive to a lot of computer scientists. And really important is that we need it to be a computing specialist who understands that it needs to be semantic enough for us to be able to, for example, people to talk about stories within digital, and structured stories within digital, that's based on empirical evidence. New forms of documentation. I do want to allow some time for questions. So I'll just do this one slide.
Yeah, go ahead.
A new form of documentation, not use the Met model, the British Museum model, or the V&A model, or whatever. You talk about what is specific, what is unique about this thing. First of all, what's its specificity? What's its extension? Why is it different to everything else? And then you can ask, what has it got in common with other things within a particular social and historical context? And then we go to the next level and say, what has it got in common with people, things, and processes across different social and historical periods? And then we have levels of connection that were much more complicated than the ones that we're thinking about currently. The question is, how do we change our human and digital systems that one system, human, computer, cybernetically join together to respond to changes in society and knowledge and make it available to organisations, whether small, either large, large, and large. How do we make these systems available to everyone? And that is the key thing that we're trying to solve in the ResearchSpace project.
Thank you. If anybody has any questions, any comments, doubts? Yeah, go ahead.
Just speak about
Dominic, for your great insights. Actually, a question which arises from the fact that I work with our historians in my institute, and I realised that even though some of those I work with have accepted using something like ResearchSpace, they still seem to want to tailor it to their form of tastes, which is still in terms of organising their knowledge as entries, what we call scared sometimes in time. But this is a way of looking at resources that very much comes from cultural heritage specialists. They've been trained to think that way. Everything is kind of a cart. So they tend to fail to see the connections between things unless they actually go and inspect cards in a systematic way. And because they, when you want to enter data, the most natural way for them to enter them is the form, because it's akin to the form of a card. What do you think needs to be done in order to help them understand the importance of connections arising from what they still tend to encapsulate as cards, giving them knowledge of matter as a difficult way of interacting with the system, or is there something else actually we should do to revolutionize the thinking?
So the important thing is that everybody is different and everybody has their own favourite way of using information. The key thing is not the interfaces per se, it's the structure and the dynamic underneath it. It allows them to go in any direction, expand in any direction. So there may be people who hate visual image maps, but might prefer using a different system. They might prefer starting off with an image annotation, actually starting there. But it's more about, it's not just a technological change, it's a cultural change. We've had, 70 years of using databases. People have got into the habit of using databases, and that's why, in a sense, they don't really take them seriously. It's a very sort of, matter of fact, oh yeah, we have to look at database and stuff like that. But if you actually really examine what's happening in organisations, whether they're in universities or in museums, you'll find that the majority of the knowledge is not in your database system. It's in the flash drive. It's on the external hard disk. It's on paper. It's on what we found was that most of the information that was really interesting about British Museum collection is in a spreadsheet. And that's very similar to a Cartesian sort of tabular format. But what was different about the spreadsheet was you could add another column and no one would tell you off. Right? You just keep adding and adding and adding. It was the flexibility that they liked about it, even though they realised that it was problematic in terms of cleaning it up and getting it into something that was more collaborative and useful. But they appreciated that. So I would say to you that if you can give something that works a little bit like in the principle of a spreadsheet, in that you can add and expand what you want to talk about. Because over a career of 30 years, of course you expand your categories of knowledge, you become more transdisciplinary naturally. If you can produce a system that does that, and actually is much more useful in terms of building it into a larger project, a collaborative project, maybe you can help with your career, with your proposals, with funding and stuff like this, then it becomes much more attractive. But it becomes much more attractive because the original potential of computers in the museum conference in 1968 in that museum, the director was talking about the fact that none of us can do it all by ourselves. And what's really important is interoperability. And interoperability depends on understanding semantics and abstractions that we can all understand, be able to expand those. And the reviews of that conference were talking about this is only useful if we can expand on ourselves. There's a curated review behind saying, yeah, this is all fine, as long as we can expand, because if we can't expand, then it becomes static and useless. And that's what we've done. We've done exactly what he said we shouldn't do, made it static. And I would argue to a certain extent we've done that.
Thank you.
Any criticisms?
I had a curiosity, coming from someone that is going to start to learn how to use ResearchSpace. What would you say that is a learning curve for someone that, what time does it take? What suggestions do you have where to start from?
So I think there are two main elements to it. One, it does work on an ontology called the single CRM. And understanding the single CRM is an extremely important part of it. What I would say to people is that single CRM is not as hard to, it's actually in principle quite relatively simple. It's just that when you look at this reference, it doesn't actually tell you well how to use it. Because it sort of has its classes and it has its properties and connected classes. But it's an inheritance ontology. So it hides a lot of the connections that you want to use, and you get frustrated because it doesn't give you the property you want. But actually it's hierarchy in different parts of the reference. So we're building tools that actually help people to understand their inheritance and can see a list of stuff. But you know, it's like anything that's worth doing. You have to learn it. So that's one aspect of it. And then I think two is just breaking out of this idea. When I started in digital, one of the things that curators told me years ago was, oh yeah, we've done a project for a data project. Yeah, we've done loads of those, they didn't get anywhere. Nothing happened in terms of the organisation, there were temporary projects. And people have got tired of it to a certain extent. There are lots of people who are enthusiastic about it, but there are lots of people who have seen it and done it, and it's not had much impact on it. So we have one of the big difficulties making is trying to persuade people that we're doing something that actually is useful to them. A lot of these aggregation projects, for example, you put the data in, the organisation puts the data in, none of their curators use it. If we're not using data that people are putting up into these aggregations ourselves, we're not using it. What's they using it for? It's got to be useful for everybody, including ourselves. If you do something, it's got to have the quality, the valuable essence has to be there in order for it to be useful. And so a big measure of this is how you use this stuff. I think it was a cultural issue in terms of getting back into something that previously has been a draw on people's time without the benefits. We need the benefits, basically.
Thank you very much. Go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. It was fascinating. I come from the IT sector, so I was looking at your speech with another perspective. But I was reflecting on the fact that with the generative AI, we are inverting the relationship between the data and metadata. Because during digitization, the first step is to produce data, and then the humans were inserting the metadata. With the generative AI, the relationship is the opposite, because the humans input the metadata and the machine generates the data autonomously. So, but this works when the data are something that belongs to our experience. to text, maybe vocal text, images, representation, 3D representation, whatever, but something that belongs to our experience. I have the impression that the connections are something that is more abstract. Is this the limit of a new kind of informatics for humanities based on connection? We should translate this concept of connection in something that belongs to our experience and give to the machine the task through AI to generate the connections on the basis of our metadata. Is this a good reasoning?
I think generative AI can do a really good job in connecting things together. I would say I use it. I have a ChatGPT subscription and I use it for certain things. But I tend to use it, but I don't trust the connections it makes because for reasons that I was it's a bit of a box, I don't know where it's coming from. And the more I use it, the more impressive I use it as a foil for anything. I think lots of the answers it comes back with are wrong. They're not wrong, but they're not fully correct either. And that's the problem with it. You don't know what the bias is in the data. I mean, lots of people have had discussions about generative AI and what stuff like that. But personally, as a historian, it's not going to give me that human, that interpretive, proper interpretive assessment of sources. It's drawing upon lots of different opinions from different places. And if you ask ChatGPT, can you replace what historians do, it will tell you that it cannot. It doesn't have that interpretive experience to be able to manage that process. It will actually tell you that it's actually not very good if you ask them a question. But it is useful for lots of things. But I think what we're talking about here is we're talking about having much more control over those connections and reasoning that's happening, rather than the reasoning that this is determined by someone out there who can write about it.
Okay, so I have just a final question for you, and if people wanted to say something. It's about the provenance of the assertions. I mean, what you show us is a special point of view of the scholars about the possible relationship, and so it's based on the scholar's background, the scholar's knowledge, and it's one of the possible points of view through which you can represent the real world object that you want to represent. And so now we are managing this kind of information to make it craft, so creating new words and having provenance in order not just to give information about something else, but also to manage the notion of agreement and possible disagreements about the specific assertion of the same objects. How about ResearchSpace from this point of view?
So from that point of view, we already use the argumentation in the TNA system. So sometimes they have scientific data that comes back, which is not certain. So they have an opportunity to say, from the other one that I've done, this is what I think it is. I put some sort of weighting on that probability. In more general terms, you can see how, for example, knowledge map might be a proposition rather than just a set of facts. And actually, in ResearchSpace, even the tools are C.0 So you can actually start manipulating these things and say, yeah, this is my knowledge map, this is what I think, this is what these reflections are, reach that
conclusion. Someone else can lecture and say, no, this is my proposition, so this is my opinion. What I think is more difficult, it's quite easy to do that in using the sequence. What's more difficult is synthesizing the contradictions between the two. I think that's where we need to do a little bit of work. So once you have all of these propositions and beliefs of different people, they have disagreements between them. How do you then connect those and say, okay, this is a stronger proposition, this proposition, or this has a bit of information here that makes this much more probable than this one. I think that's where we're going with ResearchSpace, where we want to be able to synthesize contradiction. So we have a dialectic, we want a dialectic system. That's really where we're going to head to. So research being a dialectic in its approach.
Thank you, Dominic.